Patrick McGuigan. I'm one of the co-founders of the British Cheese Weekender. I'm a cheese writer, so I write for newspapers and magazines about cheese, and it's a great pleasure to have Guy Tullberg from Tracklements, the condiment king, as I like to call you, Guy. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about Tracklements. You are one of the sponsors of the British Cheese Weekend, so we are very, very grateful to you. But we love your product. So tell us about the company. Tell us about you. How did it all begin?
Well, Tracklements was started by my father, gosh, over 50 years ago. And I think, like all good things, it started just because he loves food. I mean, he ran a restaurant for a bit, and he decided just to start experimenting and making some of his own things to go on the menu. He started with mustard, with a whole grain mustard. And as we always joke, 50 years ago, a British whole grain mustard was quite unusual. And then we've just sort of gone further into the route of condiments. We like anything that goes with meat, cheese, or fish, but particularly cheese. And I think the explosion of certainly the British cheese world, and to have Tracklements to accompany those has been absolutely fantastic. So I think that I start every day. I'm really lucky to be in the food business because I start every day thinking about, eating things, what things go with. I mean, that's our whole sort of raison d'etre. And I've been with the business for over 35 years. I'm happy to say that I just sort of love every day. It's just, being in our end of the food business, the artisan food business was really fun.
And whereabouts are you exactly in the country?
We're in North Wiltshire. So the factory sits just on the Foss Way. And I always like the idea that thinking over 2,000 years ago, maybe some Roman soldiers were just walking past carrying mustard seed in their pouches, which is of course how mustard managed to, came to the UK, because it came with the Romans. No jokes, please. But and so there we go. And it's really you could call it the South Cotswolds, but it's absolutely beautiful. We're very lucky to work out here.
Well, we've got limited time, Guy, because we've got a packed schedule, and we've got quite a lot of cheese and chutney to get through, which is a good thing. I think let's just have some cheese. It's been several minutes now. We've not eaten cheese. This seems wrong. So, and then I'd quite like to talk to you a bit about the there's a great sort of history with chutney, isn't there? I mean, it goes back a long way. But let's start, and we can chat and eat, which is always the best thing to do, isn't it? In a convivial way. Now, I don't know if people can. I'm going to hold up my cheese board. Look, my cheese board is groaning with amazing British cheeses, and Guy and I have carefully coordinated our cheeses. Not shirts, though. We should have had the shirt email, shouldn't we? Mm-hmm. I went quite loud. I'm sorry if I should have sent you that memo. So we've got a whole range. So I mean, it's quite interesting when you're doing sort of cheese matching and cheese tasting. Where do you start? Well, normally with the milder cheeses, but then we've got to introduce the chutneys as well. So we're going to jump around a little bit, but we are going to start with a goat's cheese, which is the sort of the classic cheese to start a cheese board. And we've got, not a million miles away from you, from Neal's Yard Creamery in Herefordshire. Brilliant cheesemakers. Charlie Westhead. This is Ragstone. What a beautiful cheese. Made with goat's milk, and it has this beautiful sort of wrinkly rind. So I suppose people might think it looks a bit like a Sam Moore French cheese, but it's very much its own cheese. It's of its own place. If we just hold it up, look at this beautiful little bit of breakdown on the underneath the rind, which makes it quite exciting, and gives you a kind of interesting goaty flavours underneath. And we've decided, where are we going with this, Guy? I mean, you've done a lot of cheese and chutney matching, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, Charlie Westhead up at Neal's Yard Creamery is a fan of the goat's cheese with the fig.
Okay.
We have sat on his terrace, combining this very same.
Oh, have you? I like it. You've actually sort of sat with the cheesemaker and developed this match.
Well, for my sins, I'm very interested in cheese, but I've done my level 1, Pat, my Academy of Cheese level 1.
Good man.
And so I really enjoyed discovering a bit more about that. But also, I've met these people over the years, just really enjoyed their company and enjoyed chatting with them.
So I mean, Guy, when you're deciding which chutney with which cheese, am I doing this right? I'm just putting a blob on and I'm going to.
Yeah, I got a blob on, and then I'm just going to, because here we go. This is fig relish. So what we've got is that lovely sort of deep figgy flavour. We use a bit of muscovado as well as the vinegar in there. And why do we think these two things work together?
Oh.
Well, we want a bit of sweetness, but we want a bit of acid. But goat's cheese has quite a lot of that acid. And putting those two things together, I've often said with the fig that putting those two things together, putting a fig relish with a goat's cheese, has been my goat's cheese converter. So sometimes people say I don't like goat's cheese, and I just say just try it with a little bit of this. So you put these two things together. I'm going to choose, so you're going to have to get on with it.
I mean, that is true. Whenever I do a cheese tasting, there's usually a percentage of the room who say they don't like goat's cheese, and then then you give them a very young goat's cheese, which has very sort of lovely bright acidic flavors or herbaceous note. And actually, oh yeah, it's not so bad. I think people have sort of been put off, haven't they, by those sort of cheap French chev that you can get, which is really sort of billy goat.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a beautiful.
But this is nothing like that. I mean, this is really herbaceous and grassy.
Yeah.
Has some nice sort of herby notes. I'll be honest with you, Guy. I wouldn't have picked the fig to go with the goat cheese. I always think fig and blue cheese is a really good combo, but it sort of picks up a sweetness in the milk, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also if you imagine, I think about, you may or may not want to melt this, but if you just had a hot slice of toast or something, you just put that goat's cheese shade on it and the fig on the top, it just sort of melts a little bit. I think that combination is fantastic.
Sorry, my mouth is full of cheese and.
It's all right.
It's all right. Yeah, I mean the grilled goat's cheese is a classic, isn't it? I mean,
beautiful.
It just sort of holds its shape beautifully, doesn't it? As you grill it, sort of softens slightly, brings out a bit more of the flavour. I know you're a great lover of sort of making a meal of cheese and some crusty bread and a jar of a jar of Tracklements and away you go. It's sort of ultimate.
I think it's very much our history. I mean, it's very much the British history and we would have cheese and accompaniments. That's what we did and what we do. And actually, when you revisit that sometimes, I mean, I think it's a fantastic sort of Saturday lunchtime. You gathering your friends. When we get to that point when we can, but you gather your friends, and you just simply put a few cheeses out, 3 or 4, maybe that. Just that crusty bread, beer, cider, whatever, glass of wine, whatever you want, and actually. It's so convivial, isn't it? And I have this lovely idea about people eating with their hands and eating with their fingers. I think it actually is conducive to good conversation and good company.
That sort of breaking of bread, isn't it? Or sort of sharing of cheese.
I think so.
It is. I mean, it's something we've all missed massively, actually, in the past year. I mean, my family, my wife and my kids, we always sit down at the dinner table and, try to have dinner together pretty much every night. And it is a lovely, it's a nice moment, but I'm really looking forward to, when restaurants reopen next month, and we can meet friends and kind of get back to a bit of.
And sometimes when cheese gets stuffed to the end of a meal, I think sometimes we just sort of lose it a bit where it could actually be, it's a really nice thing. And we always say, there's a lot of effort gone into making the cheese, but I also want to tell you there's a lot of effort gone into making the thing that goes with it. We put just
about the. So I mean, let's go with the sticky fig relish. Where do you get the figs from? How do you make it? I mean, are you working with sort of open vats or?
Yeah, so open vats, but we got the figs are dried figs, so they come from Turkey or Iran, because that's the flavour that we want, and we'll soak those overnight. But we also make a spiced vinegar. So just like you would, we make stuff like you would at home. We just happen to make a lot more than you do, than people do at home. And we make a spiced vinegar. So the difference being that if we pre-spice the vinegar, once you've got the flavor, it sticks. But if you put spice into something, the flavor will continue to grow and develop. So a bit like a blue cheese will carry on changing and mature. Most cheese will. But once we do that with a spice vinegar, we sort of hold that flavor. And then we're talking about an hour and a half, 2 hours to make a mix, to cook a mix. Very gentle. We're not trying to cook this thing, to complete. We're trying to just meld all those flavors together. So we get this lovely, rich, unctuous product. And we always say we make things to our taste, to the things that we like, rather than worrying necessarily about what we think the market might like. Or, they do end up being very, very popular. But
it seems to me it has this is a high percentage of figs to me. It feels really figgy. And Perry has just sent a question saying, do you get the little seeds with the crunch? And yes, indeed,
yes,
you do.
Yeah,
that's nice. That's a nice contrast, actually,
yeah.
with the goat's cheese, which is quite soft. So is that quite getting this balance of flavors? You spend a lot of time tasting up the figs, lower the spice. When you're coming up with a recipe.
We always hope that you wouldn't, we always hope that you're not going to necessarily identify every spice behind that in there, but there are spices in there, and we take them out. You're left with a really sort of fairly blank flavor, but it's just the addition and in the right, are really keen that these things accompany whatever it is they're going with, and not we're not trying to knock them out the park. And even later on, when we get to try the chili jam, you'll notice it's the same thing. The flavors work together. And that's what we're about. It's what
it's about that balance, isn't it? It's interesting you were saying about the spices, because the goat's cheese, when it starts to sort of ripen up a bit, will give you sometimes a little bit of pepper on the, just a little tingle on the tongue. And I'm getting that from the ragstone. It's what the more you eat a cheese, what I love with a cheese board is you keep going back and thinking, oh yeah, there's something new there when you taste a slice. Even with quite mild cheeses, actually. I think maybe we should move on to the Wensleydale, actually, because that's a good example, I think. But what I mean is that you sort of pick out new flavors in a cheese, and then sometimes a good accompaniment will just highlight or show you something in the cheese that you hadn't noticed. Will just sort of dovetail with a particular little flavor. So I'm getting a bit more pepper now off the cheese. I think maybe that's coming from the fig relish. I don't know, but it's that dovetailing, isn't it? Of kind of bringing flavors together, picking up.
Yeah. Well, you'll be interested to know that we actually flavor it with cloves, allspice, and black pepper. So there you go. Good spot.
I didn't read that on the label or anything, Guy, honestly. Let's move on. We've got a beautiful Wensleydale. Now, people watching this may think they know Wensleydale. They might have bought Wensleydale in the supermarket, generic Wensleydale, and it's acidic and crumbly and pretty boring, really, if I'm being slightly rude about it. But traditional Wensleydale, which is not wrapped in plastic and sold at 6 weeks, actually is an interesting cheese. So what we've got here is a very traditional Wensleydale. It's called Old Roan, and it's made by a farm on a farm in the Wensleydale area. So it's Wensleydale from Wensleydale. It's raw milk and it's cloth bound. So this is sort of like how Wensleydale used to taste. And it's, well, have a taste. It's much more sort of buttery and soft and sort of mouth-filling, but then with this there is some acidity, but it's not just all acid like you would get with a supermarket Wensleydale. It's a kind of mellow British territorial cheese, and then has this lovely bit of savoury at the end. I can say this without tasting it because I've been eating it basically all day. And we've gone, what are we going with it? Where are we going with this?
An apricot chutney. So we've got an apricot and ginger.
Right.
So something that's a little bit sweeter. You can see I don't know if you can see the colour of that. If I can hold that up, that's what it looks Beautiful. Like. And I think that these two go brilliantly together. Apricot, that sort of, it's fruity, obviously, but really, really fruity. And again, I think as I taste it with the Wensleydale, it's not actually destroying the flavour of the cheese. I think it's adding to it.
We need to talk ratios. The cheese to chutney ratio is an important equation, because I do a lot of this messing up, adding things with cheese, and often I find sometimes you need a bit more of a condiment, and sometimes you need a bit less. 50-50 normally works. I quite like a big I want them to sort of match up together. For me, with this, I want a relatively big bit of cheese and not a huge dollop of chutney. Just
maybe a quarter to a third.
Yeah, okay. I like it. Cheese and chutney ratios. I like that. I mean, Wensleydale and apricots is something you see where they put the apricots in the Wensleydale in what we call a flavoured cheese.
Yes.
Which
do we not go there?
We're not going to go there. I mean, why do that when you can just have a very nice jar on the side?
That's what I think. Yeah.
We've got some questions coming in. Where do the apricots come from? Are they any particular variety?
No particular variety. And we're after. Sometimes we use fresh in the ingredients, but we're after a dried apricot in this instance, just because it gives a slightly different flavour. So we'll come on to other things where obviously we use fresh, but something like the apricots, again, we're using a pre-spice vinegar in there. You walk into the factory when we're making these, the smell is absolutely phenomenal. You know, it's an amazing thing, and I'm lucky to have that filling, you know, that smell in and around the business and in my nostrils, you know, every day.
So you get a sort of perfume of spices filling the room.
Yeah. I mean, and also, what are we doing when we're making these sauces and chutneys and relishes? We're actually concentrating flavour. So, you know, it'll be the same with the cheese. As the moisture starts to come out of a cheese, we're starting to concentrate the flavour. Well, it's exactly the same with what we do. So when we get to a point where when we're making something, we always say we've got no bells or buzzers in the factory. There's actually somebody there stirring it with a paddle, and when they run their paddle across the cook pan and the center doesn't fill up with liquid, it's done. You know, and we do it in no other way. And if you're doing quite a few of those a day, I could see it. You know, it's not always something you think, oh gosh, but you ask everybody who works here, they all have favourites. They all have their favourite combinations.
That's really interesting, that, because so you know, it's not that you just follow a set recipe and, you know, we cook it for, you know, these many minutes and then it's ready. There's an element, you know, it's as you would cook at home. You sort of, well, it needs a bit longer, a little bit less.
Yeah, I mean, particularly, you know, we get onions. You get onions in, and we're making something, so we're going to come on to the onion marmalade. But we get onions in; they're going to be different as we go through the year. So it can't be a fixed process, and so that's why I think, you know, we're not necessarily saying that we're as blessed as the cheesemakers, but we have a role to play in this, and you know, I want to say we're as skilled and we're as artisan in that process. So understanding that, you know, you can't stick some thermometer into an onion and say, oh, okay, that's going to be different today. It's going to be, our chefs and cooks are going to have to work that out. So yeah, I mean, I would say that every batch as we cook it is going to have a very slightly different process. They'll all end up with the same flavour because actually they're good at what they do. But you know, that we're taking fresh, like you're taking milk in. Milk's going to be different.
Well, I was just the similarities, because it's the same with artisan cheesemaking. You know, that if cheesemakers that follow a recipe and watch the clock end up with very, very, very variable cheese. The best cheesemakers adapt and change how they make the cheese depending on, you know, how the milk is changing from day to day. You know, if the cows are out in the field eating grass, you know, the protein and fat contents will be different than if they're eating hay in the shed in winter.
Yeah.
And so they tweak the recipe. You know, it's not a recipe. It's they're not following a recipe. They're adapting and changing with the milk to make a really good product. Sounds like basically what you guys do.
I mean, I touched on the fact that we started in making whole grain mustard, and we mix and we make that, we grind it, we mix it into barrels, but we leave the barrels for 5 to 7 days, and those are checked every day and stirred every day, and sometimes they'll need 7 days and sometimes they'll need 5. I mean, you know, there's not a rule to say that's ready to go.
Yeah,
and that's why we have, you know, we have this sort of, it's about a skill as much as it is about just trying to make a product. So I like that. I like that thing. That's
it's not sort of, it's cooking rather than food manufacture.
That's how I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Guy, listen, we need to eat more cheese.
Keep going. Come on.
Half an hour. Come on. So we're going to move on to Wigmore.
Yeah.
We're going soft. We could have had this straight after the goat's cheese, but actually we're gonna match it with your beautiful fresh chili jam. Yeah. So we thought actually let's have it after the buttery Wensleydale, because we're gonna add a bit of spice in now. With the chili jam. So Wigmore, it's made in Berkshire by Village Made. Fantastic sort of pioneers of British cheese. I mean, they've been making artisan cheese for over 30 years, and Wigmore. This is a sheep's milk cheese, so it's kind of like a brie, but made with sheep's milk. So you can see it's kind of paler than you might expect from a cow's milk cheese. They do something called washing the curd with this cheese, which is a bit technical. If you do a level 2 academy course, you'll learn about that. But what it does is it just gives the cheese a bit more sweetness, just kind of takes the acidity down a little bit. So it's a very sort of, yeah, you can really taste the milk, and you get some flavors from the rind, some of that sort of mushroom flavor from the bloomy rind. But we're going to put a bit of fresh chili jam on here.
Yeah. So the chili jam, like a chili rose, made using, we actually had some 30 tons of chilies grown in Herefordshire. So we actually think it's one of the first chili jams to be made with British produce. But again, it's made using a Fresno chili. So we're not at the top end of the chili flavor. Excuse me, we're eating at the same time. Why do I think these two go so well together? Soft, bloomy cheeses, and the rind. I think it's the rind in a way that helps carry the chili jam.
I know what you mean, yeah. There's sort of the mushroomy notes from the rind.
Correct.
It's like sort of chili mushrooms, which is, you know, that'd be lovely. It's like stir fry, isn't it? You know, it's
a beautiful thing, and the chili, it's not overwhelming it. You've got some sweetness there. There's some sharpness, and again, I think those two just work really well together. And you know, if I was thinking, if you go back to my crusty bread idea, crusty bread, some of that, and some chili jam.
That's good, mate. I mean, also it looks amazing. I mean, you sort of get this sort of the contrast between the white cheese and the splash of colour.
Yeah.
I mean, put that on a cracker. I know you've got a sort of very posh canapé that you can make in a few seconds. But Dan Bliss is asking, a brilliant cheesemonger from Paxton and Whitfield is tuned in. She's asking, how hot is the chili jam? I mean, there is heat, but it's not. It's quite fruity, isn't it? It's got a kind of nice bouncy fruitiness as well.
If you think about, as we know, the chili is a fruit, and we actually want that sort of really sort of fleshy part of it, So we want it to have that fruity flavour. If you want to have hot, you can go and get hot any time of the day. Go and help yourself. But it's not where I live. It's not the sort of thing that I like or we like. And so I tend to, as we say, when we're developing these things, they come out of things of a sort of personal, we might have made them at home, and they come out of that sort of basis and the idea of the flavors that we like. And then we say, right, let's give this, let's give it a go and see if we can sell it. So, but chili jam is one of our favorite products. And it's one
That's really good. And I have to say, I mean, I've been sort of putting this on everything, really, the chili jam. I mean, it works not just with cheese, but it's great for cooking with, and, you can sort of dollop it on anything and it sort of makes things taste good. Oh, look, a bit of brand management going on in the background. They're lovely.
That's true. Yeah. These are little cartoon characters that appear on all our jars. And one of the things I always love is because no one ever knew what a tracklement meant as a word. And we have a little strap line on the side of each jar that tells you what the tracklement word means. So, and my favorite is the Apricot Ginger. That says on the side of Apricot Ginger chutney, it says the tracklement. Oh gosh, I can't read that because my glasses.
I've got it here. The complimentary apricot given to mothers after the birth of their first ginger child.
Correct.
My eldest is a ginger. I'll have to give him some of this afterwards.
But so we have a bit of a joke on that and the tracklements word. So
let's move on.
Yeah.
So we're going a bit more sort of intense, a bit older. Well, quite a bit older, in fact. I mean, this is a Lincolnshire Poacher vintage. So this has been aged for. So it's a kind of cheddar, but it's its own cheese. It's not a classic cloth bound cheddar. I mean, it's made in a similar way, but has a sort of its own kind of fruitiness. Made in Lincolnshire, obviously. Aged for about 18 to 22 months. Raw milk, made by the Jones family. They've got their own animals. Terrific, sort of classic, a modern classic Lincolnshire Poacher. And we're going with, what are we going with?
Caramelized onion marmalade.
Beautiful.
Okay. This fella. So again, one of our signature products. This is a 3-hour make from start to finish because we want to gently caramelize those onions. But I absolutely love this with cheddar. I mean, you know, you can use, with a cheddar style, with a hard cheese. And with poacher in particular, you've got something that's got some real wallop and power.
Yeah.
And you've got that lovely, that sort of silky flavor of the onions, some sweetness, and there's some spice in the background. So we've got some cinnamon in there. You can tell that I quite like cinnamon.
Because, excuse me for eating my mouthful, at that age, the cheese is very savoury, isn't it? And it's intense. I mean, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous cheese. Still has a little bit of fruitiness that you associate with poacher, sometimes a bit of pineapple. But it's at 18 to 22 months, it's gone much more savoury. So that sweetness on top, sweet and savoury. Oh.
Perfect. And if I, always think about this thing of, we don't want to waste any of this, do we? But when you get to the end, sometimes you get those little end bits of cheddar that you've got, grate them, cheese on toast, but spread something underneath, spread the onion marmalade underneath, stick it under the grill, and then those two things just work together so well.
That is knockout. That's my favourite so far, I have to say. We've got one more to go, which we better zip through.
Yeah.
I really like that because onions also have a bit of acidity as well. I mean, just a touch. I mean, it's beautifully sweet, but there's also just a little underlying sort of acidity that just cuts in with the cheese really nicely. Because cheddar has tang, it always has a bit of acidity.
And this recipe, between my father and myself, we have a collection of over 400 food history books, and a lot of them about the history of food preservation. And there's a chap called Sir Kenelm Digby, and he wrote a recipe for a marmalade of onions with red currant. And we pretty much took that recipe, and it's called a marmalade because that's its derivation. So, and as you know, marmalade, as you go across the continent, across Spain, actually means anything made with a fruit or vegetable. So we think, gosh, that's maybe 25 years ago we launched that. And I always remember the trading standards man came around and said, you can't sell that. so we said, quite, and then we shut the door and carried on.
It never saw him again. Is that? I mean, that's brilliant. So this was, I love the sort of numbers that you have down the side. Recipe number 22, recipe number 65. Is this because recipe, you will tweak them as you go along?
Well, as we develop them, I mean, sometimes some things become a success, some things don't. But we do seasonal, so every year we launch three seasonals. Some may go on to become great successes, and others not. But it's about us entertaining ourselves in a way. We want to entertain, but entertaining our customers too. We don't want to be stick in the muds, and you never know. So we just launched the pineapple achar, which we don't know if that's going to be great. It's going to fly off the shelves, or it's just going to join things. So we give things a recipe number as we add them to the range. Beautiful.
God, last cheese, because we must finish on time because the next talk is up. So we're going back to the fig. So back to the sticky fig relish with just finishing, as I said, I would always think fig and blue cheese. And we've got a very gorgeous gooey piece of Beauvale, Britain's answer to Gorgonzola, made by Cropwell Bishop, famous for their Stilton, but Robin Scales decided to make a sort of more gooey continental blue a few years ago. And it's been a smash hit ever since. I think this is quite a nice way to go out, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So really enjoyed that, Pat. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. I hope you all get to enjoy Tracklements as much as I do.
Well, and Guy, thank you for supporting the British Cheese Weekend. We really appreciate it.
We're big fans of British artisan cheese, so cheers to everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers.